Hey guys, it's Joe's Julian. This week I sit down with animation director for King of the Hill, Allan Jacobsen. You guys know my love for this series. I hold this one up there with Hey Arnold and Samurai Jack as perfect shows from start to finish. In this episode we chat the early days of his career and his first day on King of the Hill at Film Roman, his fond memories of the series and the folks he worked with. We also chat about the funnest episode he worked on and the hardest one he worked on. This one was an absolute blast, and expect more King of the Hill episodes and a retrospective or two really soon. Enjoy the show. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to What's My Head podcast. I'm your host, Julian. Today I'm joined by Allan. Allan, welcome to the show.
Hey, glad to be here, man. It was nice. We just did a quick chat getting to know you. And this seems like it's going to be a lot of fun.
Oh, it really is. And shout out to Sean, man, for setting this one up. Sean's going to be coming back on the show, and he's going to be talking in depth about his King of the Hill experience. So that's what we're talking about today, ladies and gentlemen. King of the Hill. Allan here, his first job in animation was on King of the Hill. So, like most of us, whenever we have a first job or a first of anything, it's right here, generally, very vivid. We can remember most of what was going on. So take me back, man. Let's jump back. What's that, 30 years ago almost? Or a little bit less than 30 years, maybe 28 years ago.
It was 1996.
1996. So we got 27 years ago, right? You're walking into, I'm assuming it was Film Roman still at that time?
It was Film Roman, absolutely.
All right, what was that first day like, man? Paint us a picture.
Get it after I got the job. I'll tell you that just receiving the call that I got the offer blew my mind. I wasn't intending to do animation at that time. I wanted to be a comic book artist, and I was encouraged to apply to animation because they have benefits. And I had a few people look at my portfolio and say you could get animation work. So I winged it. I took a test for something called Duckman and King of the Hill, and I got fortunately I got calls on both, but my friends were like, do King of the Hill, because they do that at the place where the Simpsons is made. Mm-hmm. So and I was like, oh, it's the guy who did Beavis and Butthead. This sounds cool. I took the job thinking it would last 3 to 6 months, and it turned into years of employment for me. But my first day starting at Film Roman, I rolled up and they were like, hey, it's not going to be housed at Film Roman. We're actually starting off in Century City, which was another location. So I had to sort of haul ass over there. And I met my roommate, who at the time was a character designer, Paul Scarlatta. He's gone on to be a director in his own right. But I was just like wide-eyed wonder. I want to soak up and figure out everything I can. So I was intimidated and excited, I would say, was my start to the show.
That's really cool, man. When you get there and you start handing, do you remember what your pencil test would have been when you got that call back from King of the Hill, or did that come after?
I have no idea at this point. I wish I did. I don't know what I did to submit for the gig at this point. But I was hired to be a board artist, and then it was very early on. This is before the first episode came out. So they were still, finding their way to an extent. And I was told there would most likely be a board position would open up fairly soon. And if I wanted to start early, I could work doing background layout. So I started off background layout, which was also not a particular skill of mine. Yeah. But I was like, I'll put my all into that. So yeah, it was episode 1 of season 1. He did background layout on that show.
So backgrounds have come up quite. What's the word? A lot. When I break it down, it's a lot. I'm a huge, because I told you, and the fans have heard too, that I want to be an animator when I was younger, and it wasn't until maybe a year or 2 years ago, I'm watching Kid Cosmic, Craig McCracken's show on Netflix, and I remember looking in the backgrounds. I'm like, I'm pausing it and I'm just admiring the backgrounds. It's beautiful. The colors, just the aesthetics they chose, just everything about it. And then when I was talking to Craig, he was like, well, we don't really want you to pause and just look at one thing. We want everything to be, you know, a copacetic. You want everything to kind of like level out and bring everything up. And I was like, yeah, don't get me wrong, Craig. I was like, the voice acting is beautiful, the animation is beautiful, but it was just something about the colors, the style, and everything about that. And going back to what I'd previously said, when I wanted to be an animator, I think that I would have gravitated towards back. If I ever got into that field, I would gravitate towards the backgrounds, because there's just something so beautiful about world building. Now, with you doing the backgrounds in that first part, or that first half of your tenure there, at least, what were some of the things that gave you probably the hardest or most trouble?
Well, again, you know, starting out, it was everything's a challenge, and I think the first scene, at least as I remember it, the first scene that I ever did a layout for was a baseball diamond. That's in episode 1, and we didn't have reference, and there was no internet at that time. So I was like, I know what a baseball diamond looks like. I think we might have had like one view of it, and it was trying to figure out how to make the bleachers work. I was like, wait, how do the bleachers work? I got the perspective on it, but like I had to sort of consciously think about all of those things. Because at that point, really, it was, I think I was given the opportunity to do backgrounds because my comic book samples showed that I understood perspective. So I had backgrounds in my work. So I guess that there was enough there to suggest that I could do that. But I didn't think of it as a specialization of mine. I was really grateful for the opportunity. Didn't end up doing that very long. Because I got the opportunity to be an assistant director in that first season. And then things really sort of changed for me, being part of the bigger picture, I guess. You know, getting to work with characters, all of that kind of stuff was much more where my head was at, where my interests were.
Absolutely. And you said something I want to circle back to, because I can remember, not very much, but I can remember a little bit of like what no internet was like. It's like living in a world where there's no Harry Potter, or there's no SpongeBob, or there's no, you know, insert whatever's huge at that time. I have very few memories that I can remember where like those iconic characters, those iconic moments weren't there. That, like I said, the internet. So for something like trying to find a reference for those bleachers, are you guys just having to go out, take some pictures, or you guys have like a Rolodex of photographs that you guys might have at your disposal, or how do you find out what bleachers really look like and work for?
Yeah, for the most part, it seems to me, and again, I was the beneficiary of the background designer. Phil Hayes was in charge of the department, and most of the research would have been done prior to me working on the scenes. But in those days, there was a lot of going out and buying magazines, going to bookstores and finding reference for locales. Anyone that was an artist in those days had either in the studio they were working in, or their own sort of personal, I'm looking around like it's here, binders filled with things. You know, like when I was wanting to do comics, I had binders filled with cars. I cut cars out of magazines. I had like the cities. I went and bought books on Ireland and Spain, and just so I had stuff. So typically in any project in those days, there would be a sort of a gathering of reference that the designers would do, and it was, you know, paid for by the show. And some of those materials would be available to anyone on the show. You want to flip through something that seems relevant. But most of the work, most of the thinking on those things, you know, again, I mentioned the bleachers. That was one because it wasn't worked out, so it stuck with me as like, oh, how am I going to do this? But most of that would be designed in the design department, either really most times hopefully before the storyboard, sometimes after the storyboard, but certainly for when you're doing a background layout. You would have most of that worked out by a designer already. I hope that makes sense, right? But there is a sort of whole big process. But yeah, the pre-internet was rough, and it seems still to me amazing that you can find just about anything, and a lot that you don't want to find with every search, you know? Yeah.
Absolutely, man. And like I said, man, there's two shows that I bring up on a regular basis. King of the Hill being one, and Hey Arnold being other, that were like seminal moments in my life.
Yeah.
We had this talk prior to us jumping on, like just how important this show was to me. I mean, I told you I wear short pants because of Bobby. I carry pocket sand as much as I possibly can. It rotated into my Dungeons and Dragons group when I would play with my friends. We would play online, and I was always playing a wizard. So I would always roll, for pocket sand to disrupt whatever people were coming on.
Yeah.
You don't have pocket sand. You didn't pick up sand. And I was like, listen, man, Rusty Shackleford, you never saw Rusty pick up sand. He always had sand in his pocket. So
Gotta be prepared, man.
Got to be prepared. And I mean, I still say at least once to twice a week, I don't know you. That's my purse, and I
yeah.
That's, so there, like I said, this one transcends not only my life, but just like the zeitgeist that is Julian, man. So
that's my purse. That's one that sticks with a lot of people.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
like I said, it's something so out there, and it's like as a little kid you can kind of see yourself doing that, especially because I was a lot like Bobby in a sense where I was a short little pudgy kid, and it wasn't until probably like 7th, 8th grade where I shot up to about 6'2", and nobody really picked on me anymore. I was a very big kid for my age at that time, but before that growth spurt, puberty hit, man, I was a short little fat kid. I was weird. I tried to make people laugh with my jokes. I was that cartoon comic book kid, so they get me over in that corner over there type of thing, so but I was a hybrid, man, because I loved the NBA, I loved this, I loved that, so I could be plugged and played with like anybody in school, really. I could like assimilate essentially. But like I said, King of the Hill, so important to my development as a youth.
Well, I want to just hopefully not interrupt you, but throw in something on top of that, a bit of maybe trivia. When you say Hey Arnold, one of the artists that I worked with at that time, John Magnus, who worked in backgrounds, as opposed to I feel like I did that for a while. John was one of the background artists, and he had previously worked on Hey Arnold. And when we were talking about things and I was finding my way, that was a show that he referred to quite often, just like anecdotally. So it's interesting. It's definitely that period of time. But there was at least that literal crossover. At least one person, maybe some others, but both the shows that you're citing lean towards realism.
Yes.
Lean towards like sort of real human experience, and I found that to be something that I really connected with as well. King of the Hill, I didn't expect much out of it. I didn't know. Well, how could I? It's not that I had a bad opinion of it, but Beavis and Butthead was funny. Yes. And now here's a show that's Mike Judge and Greg Daniels, who I later came to understand who Greg Daniels was. But early on, it's like Mike Judge and a writer are doing a thing. Yeah, that could be cool. And I was really surprised at how we all on the crew fell in love with the characters like they were real very, very quickly. So there is a charm to it. And that's probably one of the reasons it got sold, and one of the reasons people have followed it is that there's something relatable, something really, really, really human about it. I still dig it.
Yeah, absolutely. When you can see yourself in a character, when you can see tendencies from a character, I think it's easier to take a ride with somebody, right? There's not very many things that make us different as a person. You're from one spot, I'm from another spot. You might wear your hair longer. I used to wear my hair longer. You might have a beard. I might not have a beard. So it's just there's very, very small differences in between us. So when we can sit there and connect on things, like you're into comic books and I'm into comic books, I'm still a Wednesday warrior. I go and get them every Wednesday.
Smart man.
Absolutely. I'm not a huge trade fan. Like sometimes I have to go back and buy trades that are out of print, or I just don't feel like dropping $200 on a single issue. But for the most part, I'm a single issue type of guy. But like I said, with King of the Hill in particular, I could find myself in so many different characters. And we could see somebody that we knew that was in our orbit from all of these characters. Everybody knows a Dale Gribble. Everybody knows a Boomhauer, a Hank, a Nancy, John Redcorn. Everybody knows somebody to that extent. So that's why it made it so easy to fall in love with these characters, because like, I know this person or I know that person.
Yeah.
It felt familiar always.
Very flawed. I think it's something that I always found appealing, is that they were all flawed. They weren't presented as ideals of any kind. Nevertheless, there is this like sort of powerful through line of moral fiber, because all the characters are struggling against their worst instincts, not giving in to their worst instincts. You know, it's like real slice of life. But again, both Greg and Mike. But when I think of this, I think in particular of Greg Daniels, being so focused on story and character. And early on for me, you know, there was times when I'd be at a meeting and there'd be something that was so funny, like our favorite joke, and then Greg would cut it and say it's, you know, and not cut it because he thought it was something that they had originated in the writer's room. But then when you're watching it, he'd say it doesn't add to the story, or it's not really on character. And it took me a while to become educated by experience to really understand that. And I think part of the huge appeal of the show is that Greg shepherded the characters as real human beings, you know, real human beings who could fail and do goofy stuff, but he knew what their hearts were, and he knew what their minds were, and it kept things consistent. And if you can put those characters through interesting paces, I think it's like it becomes much more like, oh, they're the people I know.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah, absolutely. It really is, man. And there was one thing I wanted to circle back to, and that was you had said something earlier in the chat that when you went from backgrounds, it was a very brief moment, but then you went to the assistant director, and then you said your range had opened up with the characters, with the story, with what was going on. Was something that I really love, because we all have our favorites, whether it's we like to laugh at them, we like to hate them, whatever it is, we have our favorites when it comes to characters. But I think it's something completely different when you have somebody that is helping create and build these characters, not only their worlds, their perceptions, their views. So I think you guys are, it sounds weird, it sounds douchey, and I'm not trying to sound douchey, but you guys are birthing these characters, essentially. You're breathing in, that's the whole thing of animation, you're breathing in life to these characters. Who were some of those characters when you really had that field or that scope opened up to a wider level? Who were some of those characters that felt like a comfortable pair of shoes or a comfortable pair of pants, man? Who was it easy to slip into?
Well, again, they were all so amazing in different ways. Bobby, you mentioned Bobby. To me, Hank Hill is the main character, but Bobby's stories and Bobby's kind of orientation on the world, I feel like was the heart for me. Like, I found Bobby to be a charmingly awkward sort of loser. And I found him somehow lovable. So I gravitated towards Bobby. I thought Boomhauer was just cool because, you know, like, especially early on, it seemed like, yeah, he's just like, he's mumbling, but he had like a cool vibe. Dale, just amazingly funny. And I think I loved from the start, and always will, I love Bill Dauterive. Now, years and years later, I'm very familiar with Stephen Root's work in a variety of things. I think Stephen Root really brought that character to life in an amazing way. But past Stephen's work, there's the design and the scenarios that he was put in. I found Bill to be endlessly charming and unexpected for me. But so many wonderful characters, man.
There really was. And the fact that every character, you don't see this very often. And I think we might have talked about this before we hit record, but filler episodes, right? So going back and rewatching this series 4 or 5 times now, I'm very aware and very cognizant of, like, not only have I seen this, animation domination. That was the cartoon block when I was growing up. So you had Simpsons, King of the Hill, right? So usually what they would do, like, especially like during my era of King of the Hill when I was growing up, they would play the previous weeks if the season was new and it was ongoing. They would play the previous weeks at like 5:30, I think it was, the new episode at 6 or 6:30, whatever it was when Animation Domination took off. So I was getting 2 episodes, but I was always from the week before, so I'm catching up to catch up again. So these shows and everything stick like right there. Fuck, I lost my point. But nonetheless, man, the characters in particular, like I said, what I liked about these characters, somebody like Bill could, I don't want to say bipolar in the wrong way, but he was very up and down, right? So that character mode, just for him in particular, you would have a super happy guy, and then he got dumped. His heart was broken, so he would go very low. With somebody that's a character that's like that, is it very hard to track, or is it very hard to animate? Like, what goes into some of those those modes or those moments where you have to animate Bill, where he can go up or down at the flip of a coin?
Well, the thing is, I mean, it's a very, very good question. But when you're familiar and immersed, I guess, in the process, it's actually very organic, because everything that we being the people who are drawing the pictures, right? Everything that we're doing is built on a foundation of a character has been conceived, has been written, their dialogue has been written, their actions have been written. So there's all kind of inferences you can make, right? Yeah. And then the performance, when you say ups and downs, it's not like, I remember seeing Mrs. Doubtfire, and like Robin Williams was doing voiceover to I'm like, no, that's not how it goes. It's like we're doing the performances based on audio. Mm-hmm. So it's there if you listen to it. It's there if you care and give yourself to it. Mm-hmm. Something that frustrated me sometimes, probably frustrates anyone that hears this, who's worked in the business. But those folks who would do a storyboard or do anything without listening to the audio, and they'd go solely by what the script said. And anytime I could, and most of the time we had a recorded track, anytime I could listen to it, it would change everything, because it's not just words, and it's not just my interpretation of words. It's Bill, say, as an example. Bill is there, and now I have to kind of give service to that, or try to articulate that. I guess where it would be more frustrating would be the times when there were celebrity guest stars, and it depends on the individual episode, but is this meant to be like I did one that had Kid Rock and Pam Anderson in it. There's an eating contest with Bill. And they were mostly physically Kid Rock and Pam Anderson. They were intended to be, but they weren't. So like, can you really base it on them? Maybe not. Whereas the characters that you lived in more, like Bill after a few episodes, Bobby after a few episodes, Hank after a few episodes, you know who they are, like your friends, like your family, and then you're like, well, they wouldn't do that. This is how Hank would act. This is how Hank wouldn't act. So it's like it's a sort of gestalt of all of the material that we're given, and then we, on the visual side, we're again articulating it to the best of our abilities. But no, I think it wasn't a challenge. Like you mentioned highs and lows with a character like Bill. It was kind of thrilling to get to see them in different scenarios. I don't remember the episode. I told you before this, and I'm bad with remembering specific numbers and such. But when we first saw that Bill was a high school quarterback and Bill was badass, that was fascinating to me. That was exciting and challenging to see Bill from a different time in his life, a different kind of Bill, but still be Bill. Yeah, it's wonderfully. As an artist, I think when the characters are articulated so well in story and then vocal performance, it just speaks to you. It's like something to echo and amplify. And if you can give yourself to it again, instead of fighting against it, it should be this way. It was really, really wonderful, great times. Same with Peggy, as I'm talking. Peggy Hill, I found to be unlikable, not as a character, but as a person. Like if I was in a room with her, I would not want to have been in the room with Peggy Hill. Kathy Najimy's voice, wonderful, and the character very, very funny. But like I would have been irritated. I might still be irritated to be in the room with Peggy Hill, but she was fun to work with because of those quirks, because of her uptightness.
Yeah.
You know, you just think of her differently than Nancy, say. It's not that they're, you know, Nancy was sexier, prettier, but just entirely different human beings. Luann, again, another, you know, young woman positioned as like the attractive young niece, but like goofy and unaware of her sort of Kelly Bundy sexuality, maybe, you know. Yeah, I don't know. I'm off on a tangent following old thoughts, but yeah, fun to work with them because they were real characters, you know, with dimension.
Absolutely, man. You guys took two-dimensional characters and made them 3D without making them 3D and CGI. So you guys really had, you know, I without it sounding like I'm blowing smoke up you guys' ass. I mean, like I said, this, in my opinion, perfect show. When it comes to adult animated shows, there's nothing better. Like, people throw The Simpsons, you got Rick and Morty out there, you got Family Guy, you got American Dad, you got Bob's Burgers. I can go on and on and on and on. There's nothing touching. I think this is what the point I was trying to get at earlier. There's nothing touching King of the Hill. There was really no filler episodes, and this is exactly where I was going, because now I remember where I was going to go. Every character that was in this show had a reason to be in there. It wasn't just throwing a character in there to see if they could get a pop, a laugh, you know, make something happen. Every character had a moment. Every character had a purpose. There was nothing in there that was wasted, in my opinion. And going back to that Kid Rock episode, every time I think about that episode, the first and only thing I think of is it's time for America to get cocky again. And that was when Bill left, and, you know, Kid Rock's talking about entering and eating hot dog. So it's that episode sticks out so vividly, because I was like, man, Kid Rock was blowing up at that time. Like, I remember him being on the hometown radio station, 1011 WJR, free plug for you guys. You guys don't need it. But he was always on, and it was the Bow with a Bow, whatever that first hit was.
Yeah.
The same album that Cowboy was on. So he was like red hot. And then I remember just flipping through the channels, and it was when the TV guide was still the TV guide. You had the scrolling thing, and it was telling you what was coming on. And it said Kid Rock on King of the Hill. I'm like, what the fuck is going on? Kid Rock is on King of the Hill? Turn it on, and I see this. I'm like, oh shit, this is so fun. It's so cool. And then, you know, going back to the previous thing you had said, when you see a flashback of Bill, when he takes off that helmet, when you see him being a running back or cornerback, I don't know football, but he's got the mullet. And I'm like, fuck yes, let's go. Bill would have a mullet, man. It's like everything, every aesthetic detail had a purpose, and it had a point. With those characters, like I said, that those felt like second nature. I got to imagine there was probably some characters that were a little bit more difficult to slip into the headspace or really get to work with. So does any of those characters come to mind as what might have been a little bit difficult to get into?
Well, to be honest, as opposed to my usual lie, no, I initially kind of bumped on Khan Supanusampone.
Yes.
Because, and the reason I'm like hedging my bets here is I feel like I can't say this without it sounding like it's an accusation against anyone, and it's not meant that way, but it was a Asian character voiced by a white man, and most of us at the time in the layout and storyboard pool were Caucasians, and I didn't want to be doing something that was mockery of and it took me, I think, a little bit to get comfortable with the fact that we weren't doing mockery. You know, we were actually like creating a character. And when and again, I don't know exactly where this falls in the series. Probably very early. It might be in Khan's first appearance, but Hank kind of confronts him at a point in the episode, and Khan just says, "I am everywhere you want to be, Hank Hill." And it's just, kind of cracked me up as being just like, he was just a cocky kind of, he's the neighbor, the Joneses,
Yes.
you know, just the Joneses with you know, like a surface that doesn't fit with the neighbors.
Mm-hmm.
And so that would be a character I would say again that I maybe bumped on early on, but I actually really loved Connie right away. There's no characters. I don't think there's any characters that I didn't enjoy. Before we start here, we were talking briefly about Cotton, Cotton Hill. Wonderful character. Internally, like some of us, I don't want to say all of us, but we would consider that character the more, probably the most cartoonish of the cast, with the whole having his shin shot off and reattached is not actual sort of real world science, but his orneriness and the ugliness and sort of cuteness in his design is still really impressively weird to me, because he just looks like an old Bobby. It doesn't look like Hank, but he looks like that's Bobby as an old man, you know.